Hello friends, and welcome back to Learning from Experience video series. And in this video, I'll show you how to manage a knowledge base, especially when it gets more complex and more robust. Agenda for today, I'll highlight the goal, give you a quick experience snapshot of a brand new experience, and then show you some hands-on demo stuff. The goal is just to demonstrate how to manage a knowledge base through a hands-on example. So for this, I did a whole new hack-the-box machine called Unified. And to explain the experience of it in a nutshell, without subjecting you to about 20 minutes of me actually going through it, here's how it worked. So we had an attacker environment and a target environment, right? We started off with our standard machine on Kali Linux. And after recon, we realized that we have a Unify application and MongoDB in the target environment. If you're not familiar with Unify application, in this case, it was unfortunately an outdated version, which was vulnerable to Log4j. Log4j exploit was described in Black Hat Convention back in 2016 with a very in-depth explanation as to how it works. But in a nutshell, it uses JNDI and LDAP protocol to get Java objects to perform its operations. And the security vulnerability was the fact that we can make it request a Java object from any server we like. So in our infinite wisdom, we went out and set up our rogue nefarious JNDI server, right? Then we interacted with the Unify application by sending in a login attempt with a rogue JNDI pointer pointing back to our server. At which point the Unify application sent a Java object request to a rogue server. And of course, we gave that a Java object with malicious payload embedded into it. In this case, it was a reverse shell, which allowed us to gain access to the target environment. From there, we modified or updated administrative password for within MongoDB for the administrator account, and we're able to log back in through Unified Portal to the target environment essentially as an administrator. Fortunately for us, the Unify application stored the root username, which is root, and root password in like the settings. So we were able to retrieve that and then just connect to the target environment through SSH as root. And that was really it in a nutshell. To kind of show you guys a little bit of a hands-on without going through anything, I pretty much did the same thing I did in the previous videos, right? So I went through and modeled out or documented the experience as I worked my way through it. Looked at different requests, in this case, spinning up the rogue server, getting the user flag, etc., right? Nothing different. Went through and also mapped out the process, or the experience, I should say, at a very high level, like I did in a previous video. And I sliced it up based on the framework that we were using in the past, which had reconnaissance, gaining initial access, and then privilege escalation, kind of like organized it a little bit, but a little bit different. So you notice here at the very beginning, because we modeled out this artifact in the past, I just simply used that one block. So I didn't have all these multiple blocks as I did with like net new experience, net new component of the experience, which is like setting up a JNDI server. I already used it, so I just plugged and played, right? That allowed me to, number one, go through the experience faster in the actual, attack because I just had the nodes available for me. But it also allows me to accelerate my modeling exercise as well because I'm just kind of recycling and only the components that are net new, like in this case, this component here, as well as the interaction with the MongoDB later on in the experience, are the parts that I have to like think through a little bit and make sense out of, right? Additionally, some interesting things came out of it. So for example, this step here, I'll highlight it in red, we had modeled it out before. However, we learned something by executing this step. So in the past videos, we actually didn't have the software name and version as one of the items on our checklist to look for. We had like search bar, session ID, parameters in the URL. And in this experience, I also had to, notice the software name and version and then do further Googling to identify that there is a vulnerability. for this specific software and the version. So we added that to our checklist. And then after I added that to our checklist, we went through and added it to our learning tracker, right? Additionally, because it was more like an update to the previous process, I created an extra column. So you can see how we're like expanding how we're managing our learning. And now I can delineate between items that were net new things that I have learned. For example, some of these processes that I pulled out from this experience down at the bottom versus simple updates. But again, simple updates are a lot more expedient. And as we're getting better and better at going through the experience, we're also getting more efficient at modeling and focusing on just the things we don't know, right? Another interesting point that came up in this exercise is we're also getting faster at modeling, but we're also getting more comprehensive. As you can see now, we're also adding things like prerequisites that I have up here. In this case, if somebody wants to execute that artifact, they also have to install like a rogue JMDI server and have the commands for Git embedded in here. So folks can be like, or myself in the future can be more prepared before I actually execute the process. I also have pictures, right? So in this example, when we're switching the pointer to our, in our post request to point at a rogue server, yes, I have the command in there, but I also have a picture of exactly where to put it within, Burp Suite. So it makes it easier for me to remember. Another thing that kind of came up to improve our knowledge capture overall is we ran into this. So this was a password update on the MongoDB server. And besides the fact that I still had pictures and, it's a standard process, we also started color coding portions where we're going to insert stuff. It didn't really fit into all of our categories in the framework. Let me kind of show you what I mean by that. So if you recall from our previous videos, we had this framework identified to kind of get us started. And we had 3 categories that we picked from the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which was reconnaissance, initial access, and privilege escalation. MongoDB didn't really fit into it. So what did I do? Well, I went back to our friends over at MITRE, looked at their huge framework and said, oh, that's kind of like establishing persistence. And then I looked down below and it said account manipulation. So I said, oh, that sounds about right. We're manipulating accounts by, changing the passwords for already existing accounts. So let me add this persistent category to my overall framework / taxonomy and then put that new learned item underneath of that, right? And then a couple of last things. So I went through this and I said, oh, we're mapping out the experience and I'm updating the learning tracker and then I'm making new processes, storing them in the KB and then I have to update the tracker. I'm also, as you can see, updating them here just to have a snapshot view of what items are in our repository. How do I keep track of all these items, all these steps that I need to take every time I go through these like modeling exercises? So we added a KB management process that's very specific. Capture the experience, map out the experience, make updates to previous artifacts as an example earlier on, and then add updates to learning tracker, outline relevant sections based on the framework, create new artifacts, save in the main knowledge base, update learning tracker, update remind me. So now I don't have to remember all the steps and get scattered. I just execute this checklist, this process every time to manage my knowledge base as it's getting more complex and more robust, right? And that's kind of it in a nutshell, but I'll leave you with this one food for thought. So we talked about getting more efficient at learning by going through the experience faster. We talked about getting faster at modeling and more efficient at modeling by recycling previously modeled processes, right? And here's another way to accelerate our learning, this kind of another tool that we're adding to a repository. So throughout this experience, I had these moments where I said, oh, I want to know more about JMDI, or oh, I want to know more about, manipulating things in MongoDB. Oh, I want to know more about LDAP protocol. And instead of stopping and kind of like sidetracking, because switching costs are very, very costly in terms of time, I created a simple, I call it learning follow-up list. And here's the value of this follow-up list. It's very specific. It's very bite-sized items to follow up on if I have time and as opportune. So taking the time to go through the experience and the modeling exercise, I typically have to be sitting in front of my computer. However, these bite-sized items, I can look into those at any point throughout the day. I can be on the metro on my way to work. That's 20 minutes. I can chat GPT my way through some of these. 20 minutes on the way back, maybe a couple of minutes during a lunch break. And so now we're learning during the experience, we're learning during modeling, and the output of that, besides improvement and understanding, also this follow-up checklist that allows us to learn, as needed or as opportune. That's very, very tailored to things that I'm doing rather than just learning about, penetration testing or hacking in general, right? So I kind of leave it on that. We'll touch up more on different ways to accelerate your learning, but hopefully you kind of found this video productive and learned some things about how to manage a knowledge base as it gets more complex. Hopefully we'll see you in the next video. Bye.